So we move into our next presentation, and this one is virtual. The topic is Civic Firewall. It will be presented by Mr. Craig Perue, Principal Investigator, DMIL, or Digital Media and Information Literacy in the media sector. Even though he's not here, kindly make him welcome.
Permanent Secretary of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, Major Dr. Kasim Shu, Chairman of the Barbados Broadcast Authority, Dr. the Honorable President of ATSC, Ms. Madeline Nolan, the staff of the broadcast, members of the media, and especially invited guests. I'm very honored to share with you this morning on this very special occasion some research that I've been doing at the behest of the broadcasting on the media sector. And this is the result of a nearly 3-year-long project that began in 2020 on digital media and information literacy. And that national policy framework was presented to the Office of the Prime Minister 2 summers ago, and we have now begun the pilot project of implementing this framework in the media sector. And I'm going to provide just a summary of some of the findings. To be very brief, the goal of this project is to identify how the Jamaican media sector can be upskilled to increase its viability and global competitiveness in the face of the current global technological and evolutionary pressures. And we've come up with a solution, which I'm not going to get into in this meeting, but hopefully I'll be able to discuss it with you all at a later point. The project used a neurosymbolic approach that is combining large language models as well as expert systems. And so one of the reasons we did that is because these same technologies are those which the media sector and the society more generally has to be adapting to. And I'm going to skip to very near the end to show you why this talk is titled The Civic Firewall. Because as we were doing the research, the starting proposition was that, well, Jamaican media is like the media sector all over the world, especially with our largest trading partners, the United States, where radio was invented, and the UK, where it took off just a few years later. And our media sector is closely entwined with the US and the UK, we thought, and to some extent with Canada. And those of you who know the history of media, Jamaican media, know this even better than I do. But the findings showed that that notion was not entirely true. In fact, Jamaican media function very differently in several important ways from the way the broadcast media, especially, but also newspaper, operates in the US and the UK and Canada. And to be very brief, I'll come back to this at the end, but I want to prime you with these points. So Jamaican media is tightly entwined with popular culture and our nation brand. It's critical to our identity in a way that it doesn't work, it doesn't have to play this role in the US or the UK. And it's also critical to our sovereign defense in a number of ways. All right, so having just primed you with that, let me tell you why this should matter to you, why I think this will be interesting to you. So we started out by looking at saying, well, this needs to be a very practical project. It's meant not to be a paper, but it's meant to affect the way that we go about upskilling our entire society, but beginning with the media sector, um, based on the methodology that we had developed and shared with the Office of the Prime Minister for the digitalization of our society. And so we looked at what about 120 to 130 Jamaican media practitioners, some of you are in the room, what you have said over the last 25 years or so about the media sector. And we did the same for the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and a few of the other large countries that we share some commonalities with. And so that you know what I mean when I talk about media. We have traditional media, which we all know about, print, TV, radio, public broadcasting. But there's also new media, digital journalism, streaming, OTT, connected TV, which is where we're going with ATSC 3.0 in some ways, podcasting, social media, and so on. And then, of course, there's advertising and marketing. We couldn't leave this out because, of course, this is policy, media research, and academia. Now, so those are the entities that we're looking at. And then we wanted to say, okay, well, so what's happening? How do these entities relate to each other? And we see some disruption, and we've talked about this now for quite a while. But we have digital advertising and ad tech disrupting advertising creative strategy. And this is one of the reasons that we've had so much money shifting away from our media firms. It's been bleeding and going to the hyperscalers, really, the Amazon, Meta, and Google. But also streaming and OTT and CTV is disrupting broadcasting, digital journalism is disrupting print, social media is disrupting journalism, and podcasting is disrupting radio. There's also some evolution, radio evolving into podcasting, print evolving into digital journalism. And then I'll just skip down to the regulatory side. We have media policy and regulation is now governing traditional media, governing digital and new media, governing digital advertising and ad tech. And we have examples, for example, of Ofcom in the UK, the IMDA in Singapore, and so on. So this is taking place at different rates and in slightly different variations in different countries. So I said all of that to give you some background to the work that we've been doing. But I wanted to, having done that ontological work, in truth, it was preceded by a historiographical analysis, looking at how media has evolved over the years. And I promise you, I'm not going to bore you with the research details because we're interested in the practicalities, how it can be applied. But this is the most recent epoch. We're living through epoch 6 now. The rest of the world, the way they see what are the important things that are happening in this epoch. Just looking at TV, we're going to leave out radio and newspaper for now, although there are some parallels. But they talk about streaming economics and rebundling. This is a big issue with 5 different subdimensions. Attention economics and advertising reallocation. We all know that Facebook and Google, Amazon and others have convinced a large number of firms that they're as effective, their banner ads are as effective as broadcast TV and radio. But it turns out that we now have very strong evidence, for example, from IPA, the huge database of US and UK ads, which show that this is just not so. And high attention media environments continue to outperform low attention environments. We have the news media structural crisis. In the US, the news desert dynamic is considered a market failure, which if it's a market failure, then it means that government has to intervene, or philanthropy. There have to be other ways. We can't simply rely on market forces. Then there's generative AI and production disruption. And I know many of the firms are now trying to deal with this, but AI adoption is outpacing audience trust. That's just one of the issues. And then the creator economy. which is perhaps something we're more familiar with. But this is a distinct proto-industry within the media sector. Now, the important thing, the critical part of this was, okay, so what is going on in Jamaica that's different from these places? Or is everything here simply maybe a few years ahead or a few years behind what is going on in the advanced economies? And it turns out we think Jamaican practitioners, you in the room, persons like Dr. Patrick Prendergast, Dr. Hickling Gordon, the CEOs of our firms, the marketers, you said, well, you know, there are 10 distinct ways in which media, we think about Jamaican media that's different from how academics and practitioners in the US and the UK think about their media sector. One is that sovereignty and innovation sustain island broadcasting. Regional unity counters digital platform extraction. Creative industries yield sovereign economic value, and so on. There are 10 of these different ways in which we Jamaicans think our media sector function that is quite distinct from what you'd hear from an American media exec. And I hope to be able to discuss these with you at length at another time as part of the project that I mentioned earlier, the media sectors, the media skills upgrading project. But let's get down now to, let's talk about a few of the inferences I've been able to make from this. In general, we know that Jamaican media is tightly entwined with popular culture and with our nation brand. Unlike in, and I readily acknowledge that this is largely based on the scholarship of Dennis Howard, an eminent radio practitioner and academician. He's pointed out that unlike in the US and the UK, where the routes to market for popular music especially are very different from what we see here in Jamaica. In Jamaica, there are 3 different routes to market, and they frequently happen in parallel. So you don't go straight to you get a publishing contract. Instead, any new music can make its way through the dance hall, through a studio, or to radio first, or second or third. There's no surety about which one is going to get out first. And there are feedback loops between all of these 3. And that's just one example. And the nation brand, I mean, if you look up Jamaica, and we know the Jamaican person that is most recognized around the entire world is Bob Marley. And right in the top 5 along with Bob Marley is the singer of Give Me the Light, right? Sean Paul. And then, of course, we have Usain Bolt and Marcus Garvey and so on. But it is our culture, despite, you know, economists like to talk a lot about mining and tourism and so on. And those are great, those are important. But Jamaica's competitive advantage globally remains our popular culture. And therefore, what is covered in the media, whether on radio or on TV, also impacts our nation brand very importantly. It has a huge impact on it, especially given that persons in the diaspora are consuming Jamaican media via those media channels. Also, Jamaican media is critical to identity, or as one of our practitioners has said in the past, smadification, which is not the kind of conversation that happens a lot in the US or the UK. But for us, Jamaican talk show radio, many of you I'm sure remember Agri Brown and other prominent talk show practitioners. Talk show radio has played a role in the Jamaican civic sphere in a way that it doesn't work, or it has not worked in the other markets that we like to talk about. And whether you take Faye Ellington's position, the doyen of the Queen's English on radio, and hers is a nuanced position, or that of our other practitioner who calls herself the bumpy head gal. Whichever position you come down on, the fact is that these conversations take place in the media, not just in classrooms, and it is through the media that these conversations are negotiated, and they have been critical to our formation of our national identity. And finally, like Yasu Safar, I hope that I'll be allowed to say some controversial things, but I will try to do so within limits. Media is a civic firewall for Jamaica, especially at this time, because it is critical to our sovereign defense. Propaganda has been a formal part of military doctrine in the Western world by some of the superpowers that you know very well, for at least since the 1990s. And it is something that our media sector is best placed to guard us against, to guard the entire population against. So we are fortunate in Jamaica that we enjoy a freedom of the press that many other countries, which style themselves democracies, do not enjoy. And we have to guard that freedom very jealously, because it is the only way that we will be able to remain free as a people. The second is information disorder, and COVID-19 showed us very clearly what happens when there is information disorder. There were many messages, misinformation and disinformation passed via WhatsApp and some of these other digital channels. And we have all kinds of mischief that takes place on X or on Facebook and so on. And or prominent persons, whether they're politicians or CEOs, have to be guarded. They have to guard themselves against this, and the media is one way in which is one channel to protect our society against that kind of shredding. The third, is mental colonization. It is our media who help us to know who we are, who help us to continue to form our identity, to continue to negotiate that identity among ourselves and remain Jamaican and not merely an appendage of this or that superpower. It is our media that help our school children to understand their role in this world. And finally, the fourth is, I want to talk a little bit about trust. We know that across the entire world, including in Jamaica, that there has been a breakdown in trust in institutions, trust in government, and trust in the media. But trust is something that we as a sector are very well primed to reclaim at this point, because our media firms have authority. Many of our firms have established brands that have been established over decades. And that authority rests on the exercise of particular processes and expertise. Now, this expertise is typically, both the process and expertise are learned in media schools, for example, CARMAC and NCU and our other media training institutes. We have these particular journalistic processes which distinguish social media creators typically, not all, from what we call journalism. And there is this expertise that's been built up over time, and that now includes knowing how to use modern digital technologies to ensure that we are not unwitting vectors of misinformation and disinformation. So the journalistic processes plus the expertise in your beat, in your society, in knowing your local audience, knowing your culture, together with the authority, the reputation that's built up over time, is what creates trust. And as media academics have pointed out, despite all the headwinds in terms of the digital technologies, the hyperscalers, and the evolutionary forces in terms of the social media economy that's happening, the fact is that we are well placed should we choose to look positively on how to use these same technologies. We are well placed to establish and maintain the trust that our audiences have had in us for decades. And in that way play the critical role that really no one else can, no other sector can, as the civic firewall for Jamaica and the Caribbean. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Sir Craig. I was listening to him just kind of reinforcing what makes the media extremely important when it comes to civic firewall. I think what's also important is that even as we're speaking about digital transformation and digital implementation, it is extremely important that we do not overlook our citizens who still rely heavily on traditional media. There's still many areas, even within Jamaica, that are defined by our talk show, our radio hosts. For me, he mentioned a few earlier, and all I could think of was Mutty Perkins. I was raised on the ho, 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 ho. Once you heard that laugh, you knew it was the inimitable Mutty Perkins. And so, as much as we are speaking about transformation, may we not forget that the culture and the identity is still very much rooted in how we view traditional media. I will also say this, I just came from Barbados actually, and a conversation that was had is that many entities that are known for being credible in the space are beginning to act and talk like and sound like the others. So sometimes you see something come up on your social media and you're scrolling and you can't even tell whether this is media or is this just a citizen who is just posting at will. It is extremely important that we recognize that you still have to carry yourselves in a particular manner that we can't possibly confuse you from the rest of us. I want to thank Craig very much for his presentation, just for reiterating a lot of things about the media and why it continues to be extremely important. Another round of applause for Craig.